Good day, everyone. We're going to talk about today sourdough starter. And so just a little bit of history. Sourdough's been around for thousands and thousands of years. And some of the best bakeries in the world have been using the same starter for quite a long time, meaning that you're using this starter and just sort of replicating it over and over and over and just adding to it and feeding it and continuing. So if you don't have a starter or you don't have a friend who's given you some starter, you can start your own starter, okay? Which is what I did a little while ago. And I had help from two very special friends that I work with, Christian Dempsey and Juan Cruz, who've been doing this for quite a while. And as a chef, I've learned about it, I've done it, I've used it, I've used sourdough bread, but never really made it from anything other than yeast. So all the pastry chefs and old time bakers and bread bakers, these guys would have used these sourdough recipes forever. The cool thing about the sourdough is that you really only start with two ingredients, and that is flour and water. And what you're doing is you're gathering the natural bacteria and natural yeasts that are in our air. And then those start to feed on our flour and in that moist environment and in that warmth. And they continue to grow a culture that is really, really good for making bread and for other things too, which we'll talk about later on. So I just want to talk about how to start your own starter. And then after that, I'm going to talk about feeding your starter. So you're making your initial starter is a 7-day process. And what you'll do is you'll start off with 1 cup of whole wheat flour. If you can get the organic stuff, that's always better. And water. And that water has to be dechlorinated. So you have a couple of options here. What I do is I just take water out of the tap, and I leave it open for a couple of days, and any chlorine that's in there will evaporate. If you're more of a purist, you could also use spring water, or you could use distilled water as well. You just want to make sure that you don't have chlorine in there killing any bacteria and any yeasts that you are growing in your culture. Okay, so it's important to make sure that that doesn't happen. All right, so what you'll do is you'll start off with 1 cup of whole wheat flour and 3/4 of a cup of water, de-chlorinated water. And classically, you'll see it in a mason jar, or you'll see it in some of those clamp top lid jars. What you're going to do, it doesn't really matter as long as it's a clean. This is just label, by the way. Okay, so I'm a green guy, so I like to use things over and over and over again. So this has been cleaned through the dishwasher. It's been sanitized completely. And what I would do is use this. So I'm going to put 1 cup of flour in there, and I'm going to put 3/4 of a cup of whole wheat flour in there. Going to stir it up, and I'm going to keep this with the lid off for, well, it's going to be 7 days, and you're going to have a feeding process that you're going to have to do in those 7 days. I'm going to show you what a feeding looks like because I have an existing starter and I have to feed it anyways. And I'm also going to use that starter to replicate because there are a few other people who want to use a starter. So I'm going to prepare one for them as well. So I'll show you that feeding process. But basically what you're going to do is on that day 1, you're going to create that base starter, and then it's going to gather those yeasts from the air, and it's going to start a culture. You're going to need to feed this thing at least once a day. Okay, for the first 7 days. And if you start getting a little worried, you could always double it up and feed it twice a day. It's not going to hurt, but there is a process, and I'll show you that process. After that 7 days, then you'll be able to use this and start making bread with it. Before you use it for bread, we're going to have to ramp it up. And when we say ramp it up, basically just means we're going to double our feedings so that we feed it once and then twice in 1 day. And then we're going to see sort of our starter start from here and hopefully at least double, if not triple. And when we get to that point, then it's ripe to make bread. Okay, so we'll show you that. All right, so let's take a look at the starter that we have. So even though you started with a volumetric measurement to start off with, meaning that you've got that cup of whole wheat flour, and that 3/4 cups of water on your second day. So after 24 hours, I should also add this too. So in that process, it's going to release CO2 gases, and CO2 gases will make mosquitoes and fleas and fruit flies and things like that will want to try to get into your starter. So it's a little easier to either put a cheesecloth on top or even a cloth, a regular cloth, and try to keep it in that room temperature zone. So 21, 22 degrees Celsius is what you're going to want there. Okay, so this is a starter that was fed yesterday. And so you can see that it actually came up and then sort of receded back down. Okay, so this just means that it's consumed all the sugars and the proteins in the flour, and it needs more feeding. So right now I couldn't use this for bread. Okay, so what we would do from this point forward is you're going to need a little scale. Okay, so this is important here. Volumetric works, and I created my starter with volumetric measurements. But once I started using the scale, things got a lot better for me. Okay, so I'm just going to change the view so that you can see what I'm doing here, and we'll continue our discussion here. Okay, so here we are down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our yesterday's starter and put that here, and we're going to take a new container. And there should be a zeroing out function on these little digital scales. If you don't, then you would just adjust the little the needle until it hits 0 with it on it, and then that way you can add to it. Or you can do simple mathematics, see how much it weighs, and start adding the things that you want to it. Not a big deal. Now, if you have a proper baker's scale, okay, these are one of these ones where you put weights on the one side. Those are very, very accurate and very, very good. But there's not too many of them kicking around. I wish I had one. So I'm going to start off with this. I've zeroed it out. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can't. Okay. And I'm going to go with grams here. So what we're going to need is 200 grams of that starter. And I like to give it a little stir here first. And then we're going to pop that starter in there. And here we go. We're at 123, 48. Now, if you're up by a gram or down a gram, that's not too big a deal. But there we go. And I've gone to 20, a little bit too much. I went to 208 there. So I'm going to take some of that out. There we go. And now I'm at 198. So just another little drop should kick it over. There we go. Might as well be accurate. Okay. Now, what to do with this? On those 7 days, when you're initially creating your starter, this here is called discard. Okay, and in that first 7 days, you have to discard it. You got to get rid of it. It's not useful for anything. But after that 7 days, and after this is an active starter, I can actually use this to create yet another starter, or I can make my bread with it, or I can I made sourdough waffles as well. You could make sourdough pancakes. There's a million things that you could actually do. You could even just fry that dough with a little bit of herb and some oils, and it'd be very delicious as well. So after the 7 days, you don't have to throw it away anymore. But in that 7 days, when you're creating that initial starter, this will be basically garbage. So just, roll it down the sink or whatever. Okay, so back to here. I have 200 grams of starter. And what I'm going to want to do now is I'm going to add 75 grams of flour. And if you can get unbleached flour, that's the best, obviously. Now, once you get your starter done, you may want to invest in all kinds of different flours as well to make some really, really interesting sourdough bread. Okay, so far I've made some. Oh, there we go. I'm just keeping an eye on this while I do this. Yeah, you could use different rye flours. You could use whole wheat flours, multi-grain, anything like that. And I often find that it's usually about 3 rounded spoons here, and I just went a little over here. So I was looking for 275 grams. So I've got my 200 grams plus my, there it is, and it's right on the money. My 200 grams plus my 75 grams of flour. And then I'm going to add my de-chlorinated water, okay? Or spring water, or distilled water would be fine too. So same thing, I'm at 275. Now I'm looking for 350 grams. Okay, so we're at 370, it's 317, 326, 347, 49. Probably, there it is, beautiful. And what you'll find is that now stirring this, I like something small. So if you've got a chopstick or a skewer or something like that, you can use a spoon, but then you got to try to get all the stuff off the spoon. Okay. And I want to stir this really, really well. So I want to make sure that I'm basically just feeding this starter here. I'm going to mix it really, really well. Now, I'm just using this jar to show you just a standard feeding, but if I was ramping up, I'd use a bigger jar. So right now, this is full right at about to here, even though you see that there's some mess up here. What I also like to do is take a marker and just mark where this is. Now, my friend Juan, he actually uses an elastic, and he keeps that elastic around all the time. And that way, before he's doing his feedings, he knows exactly where that goes. But what's nice to see is you can see that grow. Again, in that first 7 days, it's just going to be creating that starter. And the more time that you can keep that sort of lid off and let the natural air get in there, the better. I'm going to take this out. Okay. And I just throw this on like that. Okay. And this is what my regular starter that I just sort of throw on there. I just put a little bit just so air can go. So you'll see that CO2 starts to develop and starts to come out and starts to come out. And like I told you before, you got to watch out for those fruit flies too, because they're going to want to go in there. They're attracted to the CO2 that's released from there. Okay, so make sure that you do that. You keep it in a nice warm place. If your house is a little cold during the day, you could always put it in the oven with just the light on. And sometimes that's enough warmth to get her going. Sometimes I leave it in the window, let the sun go on it. My friend Juan, he actually takes it outside sometimes with him. And that brings me back to another little story, because bakers way back would carry their starter home and back to the bake shop in the morning, just to allow it to gather even more bacteria and yeasts from the natural environment. And that would help their starter a lot. So these old bakeries would continue to do that. And like I said, this discard here, okay, and remember, not the discard in your first 7 days. The first discard in your 7 days is garbage, okay? So you're going to do that feeding every day, and some's going to go down the sink, and it's going to hurt a little bit, because you're going to think, oh my God, what a waste, especially in these days when trying to find flour is a little tough sometimes. But I'm going to make some for a friend with this. So this discard, I'm going to do this, feed it, and do that. Otherwise, I could use that discard, ramp it up, and use it for my bread, or I could put it into a sourdough batter. And again, the sourdough batter, you kind of ramp it up too. And there's, maybe we'll make another video on how to do those too. But that discard, once you've got past your 7 days, is useful. It's things you can do things with. And so last thing I want to say about these starters is you would do this every day if you were using it all the time. But let's say that you're sourdough'd out. And what you could do is you could give it a last feeding and put it in the fridge, and maybe take it out once a week, do a feeding, keep it in the fridge. And then when you're ready to start making bread, you got to think ahead a little bit, but you got to take it out and then just start ramping it up. Okay, so dual feedings, and you'll probably find that after a day and a half, you'll be able to get her back up there till she's, when she's starting to come up and double in size, and that's important. Okay, so that'll be this part of this video. I'm just going to do a series of videos and then put them all together and so that you can work through this and make bread and use discard to do other things too. Anyways, have an amazing day. Good luck with this, and we'll take it from there. See you.